Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game podcast with myself, Ben Scallon, and my esteemed colleague, Jason Osborne, who I just praised for having such a consistent background and almost as if to defy me and make me look like an idiot. We now have what appears to be a gray void between dimensions. It looks like you fell through the back rooms and ended up in some kind of eternal purgatory state that is neither realm.
Wow, as we were getting into it, I'm just sitting in front of a physical representation of the Irish political scene. It's just such a featureless landscape. But no, I think to be fair to take our viewers' side here, not that we're ever against it, but against us arguably. I don't think consistent is a word that can be particularly applied to our podcast, given that it's been like different background every week. Uh, I don't know, Tuesday, Wednesday upload the last week. It's like, we beg your forgiveness and we'll look to do better.
Different host. I suddenly became more handsome last week, and
Exactly. Slightly shorter, but 100% aesthetic increase.
less of a horrendous eyesore on the viewer. So, Jason, before we launch into our first topic of the day, which is the absolute drudgery that is the Irish presidential campaign, I think a lot of people probably don't even know that we're having a presidential race this year because almost nobody has declared interest in pursuing it, and there's been very little discussion about its implications and so on. But before we get into the lineup of candidates and speculative candidates that we have here, which we're going to be going over each one individually and analyzing what we make of that. Would they do well? Do we think they would run? How far we think they would get?
We should disclaimer. It's like 90% of these is just like shit, won't run, shit.
Yeah. And also, yeah, most of them. Basically, we found a list online of the speculative candidates where it's like, well, this person might run, but as you were saying, it's entirely pulled out of someone's ass. Like, there's no reason to believe that they would run. It's almost like you just somebody had a dream and they were like, oh, I think Fintan O'Toole might go for it. Why not?
I knew it was speculative when I saw my 2-year-old son on it.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, some people are just ambitious from an early age. You never know.
I know.
But before we get into it, I wanted to ask you, will you be running?
I haven't in keeping with apparently everyone else, I haven't decided yet. I've had a few people say it to me, and I'm taking some time to think about it. I'll probably announce it in the next couple of weeks.
I mean, you won't be eligible to run age-wise. I think you have to be 35 at least. So that is one barrier. But aside from that, will you be throwing your hat into the ring?
No, I won't be throwing my hat into the ring. Unless something changes. Like, God, please God, there be someone, who'd do a lot more good than me in that office putting their name forward this time around, as I'm sure we'll get into. But
you see, I was going to say you can make history as the first short king to occupy the office, but your predecessor would have you beat in that regard. So unfortunately, the history making victory has been claimed already.
Exactly, yeah, and there's absolutely no way. I mean, I don't actually know whether I'm taller than Michael D. Higgins, but there's absolutely no way I can beat that aesthetic, to use the word again. Like, he has the stick, he often wears his little fedora and things. He looks like the sort of guy you'd chance upon sitting on a stump in a forest or something.
I think you and him doing some kind of pay-per-view would be a great, and then the winner gets to donate it all to a political organization of their choosing or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no. At the break between rounds, we just have to climb into a cannon and get fired out of it or something.
Well, without further ado, we might just take a look at the actual list, because as we've said, it's been, like, this is a job that comes with a big salary. It's an important role. Obviously, that sounded very I don't know. That sounded questionable the way I mentioned the salary first. That's not what I meant. What I mean is it's attractive to people, even if they aren't particularly invested in changing the country and making a difference, that you would think you could find politicians who would want to go for a 7-year gig where you can't be kicked out of office for the better part of a decade at least, and where you're going to be making fat bank the entire time, in addition to all of the various expenses that you can claim, and you're flying around the world meeting important people. So even if you're a complete amoral mercenary, you would think that you would get all kinds of takers for that. But as of yet, currently we have businessman Peter Casey, the dairy businessman who ran last time and did very well. He came second after making some statements that should not have been controversial, but which were, and that worked to his benefit because he was kind of seen as a blow everything up, piss people off candidate, piss off the right people. So he did very well for himself. He's running again. We have Conor McGregor, who will not get on the ballot, so it's almost not worth talking about. We've discussed him before. The unnamed Aontú candidate, we know that Aontú are looking to run somebody. An unnamed Fine Gael candidate, Simon Harris has said they're going to run somebody, but we don't know who. And also Nick Delahanty, he says that he is looking to get as many nominations as he can. He's making some progress there. He hasn't quite secured it. And so, to the best of my knowledge, from my research online, that seems to be all of the people who have expressed any interest. And a lot of them, frankly, whether you like them or not, will not be able to secure a nomination. You know, even if they try their hardest, even if they might, you think maybe they would make a good fit for the role, it's hard to see. Like, I mean, look, I'm not. If he manages to pull it off, then fair play to him and more power to him. But I feel like somebody like Nick is going to struggle, given that he is such a political outsider, and you know you'd need quite more than a handful of politicians to back you in that. So, and similarly with Peter Casey, I mean he did very well the last time, and so he might be able to leverage that, but it remains to be seen. What do you think of that for the confirmed list before we move on to the speculative list?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious. Probably Nick Delahanty would be certainly my favorite candidate on that list. But I think his blessing in this regard is also his curse, which is that he's a little too cutting edge to go for president. I think, to put it that way, like he's obviously doing really good, in-depth investigative stuff in relation to sort of the iPass industry, as it were. And he really is, I would say, in a way that I would like to think Gript is as well, driving a lot of the conversation in the direction that it has to go in Ireland over the next couple of years. But the difficulty with doing that is that, you're starting from the place of a seed initially. You haven't grown into one of these sort of big establishment figures that you kind of need that prestige nearly if you're going to throw your hat into the ring in any sort of effective way for the presidency. So while I think it was really honourable of him to put his name forward and to contest it, and I certainly won't count him out. I mean, I really wish him well. I would struggle to see him sort of doing it essentially. And then of those that are confirmed so far, I mean, fairly slim pickings, you would have to imagine. Between Peter Casey and Conor McGregor, Peter Casey probably has the better chance. But I know, despite we said those are the only sort of confirmed ones in terms of like, yeah, definitely want to do this, because there are a few as well who are sort of more, how would I put it, more inclined to put their names forward, but they haven't been given the sort of green light yet, and we're going to get into them, like people like, say, Fianna Fáil's Mary Hanafin, who I think it was last week, I can't remember if I was reading about it, when she was pretty much saying she'd love to do it, but again, she hasn't been sort of given the go ahead for it. So I think it'll not to be sort of casting too wide a net currently, but I think it's going to end up being someone kind of unless someone very interesting comes forward and puts someone equally sort of. Peter Casey does have a chance. Conor McGregor, as I say, I really don't think so, but I think unless someone else with that kind of prestige, who sort of voice sufficiently interesting opinions, comes forward, it's going to be fairly run of the mill, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, one of the speculative names that was thrown out there was Bertie Ahern, and he's not said he wants to run, but he's also never ruled it out. When he's been asked about it in recent years, would you consider running for the Irish? He always says, "Oh, never say never," and you never know, and these sorts of answers. And he also, as some people will remember, relatively recently rejoined Fianna Fáil as a member after resigning. Now, it was just as an ordinary member, like he just got his official registration, but you'd wonder what was that for, if not because he has some sort of long-term plan to do something. And I would have thought. I mean, I'm a young person. You're a young person. I think it's fair to say that among our generation, he's kind of universally reviled. Like he's a very polarizing figure in many ways, Bertie Ahern, and lots of people just associate him, rightly or wrongly, with everything that's wrong with Irish politics. He kind of symbolizes chancers effectively. Whether that's fair or not, I don't want to defame him, but I'm just saying that's how a lot of people perceive him.
Yeah.
And so I was of the view, oh sure, he hasn't a hope. What kind of lunatic in his camp told him that it was a good idea, if that is indeed what he's planning to do? But it actually, when I did a Vox pop about this and I was going around Dublin just asking random people on the street, if he ran, would you vote for him? I was surprised by the number of people who said yes, and not just a kind of a tentative yes, but there were some enthusiastic yeses in there. I wouldn't say it was 50%, but maybe 40% of people I talked to. There were people who were saying, yeah, look, he had his own personal foibles and faults, but the country ran better back then than it does now. And I think some people were kind of indicating that they viewed him as less ideologically possessed, that while politicians now are into kind of woke madness, he's a little bit more trad Irish politician. I don't know if that, again, realize this is not my opinion. I'm not saying that this is what I think. I'm saying this is what I was hearing when I was asking people about it. So maybe he'd do better than we think.
Well, I mean, as we say, the reason we wanted to discuss it is because it struck both of us as being off just such this sort of presidential campaign trail, to put it that way. It was off to such an unbelievably slow start. The fact that, as I say, next to no one has confirmed that they're doing it. You have a bunch of people sort of more or less in the mix. Obviously, it's always the way with elections. Things will heat up as it draws closer, which, if I'm remembering correctly, it's November that they have to, is November the election is going to take place, or do they all have to have decided?
The November's the election, I believe.
Yeah, so it's going to take place in November. So obviously they'll have to, come forward in the next couple of months in order to get things really underway. But there is potential for a lot of. I fail to see upset actually taking place, but certainly some sort of interesting dynamics to come into play. I mean, obviously a couple of other people quite heavily speculated about were Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill, obviously First Minister up in the north, and she hasn't ruled it out. And at the same time as this, obviously Sinn Féin is looking to table a motion in the Dáil to sort of extend presidential voting rights to people in the north. Now, you and I have discussed this previously in relation to general elections about how the reason they didn't necessarily want to extend voting rights to people in the north is because it would people like, say, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil would have foreseen that resulting in a Sinn Féin boost. So I can't imagine this is going to do too well this time around either, even though it's obviously, you would say, politically less consequential than a general election. But and as well as that, Sinn Féin is obviously sort of on a downswing, you would say, in terms of their popularity. But it's pretty much guaranteed, I would say, that a few more interesting elements are going to come into play over the next couple of months. It's been an astonishingly slow start to it. And as I was saying to you before we came on, I feel like I've seen way more articles of people not only saying they're not going to do it, but sort of saying that they wouldn't want to do it ahead of, rather than people saying that, oh yeah, I'd love to do it or I'd love to run and I'm just waiting for the green light.
Yeah, it seems like I can't imagine why that is, because I suppose the presidency is a relatively unique election in the sense that if you're running for a particular constituency, you're probably dealing with people who are similar in some respect. So obviously every constituency of the country is different, has different kinds of people in it. You're going to get a spectrum of views, but there's a general constituency profile of, say, Dublin Central. Dublin Central is a perfect example. Obviously we had the monk running in that particular constituency, and obviously he's from around there, so he had a natural advantage. It was his home territory. But even aside from his personal connection to the area, I feel like he only could have gotten the result he got in a constituency like that, because not because there's anything wrong with the people there. I just think that they're more anti-establishment, more likely to vote for a rebel candidate who's going to upset the apple cart and so on. And so that was a natural fit for him in a way that somewhere like Dunleary would not be at all.
Well,
You know,
there's that sense that we really just love the local in Ireland. I mean, it's also this idea that I said Michael Lowry probably wouldn't be elected in any other constituency in Ireland, but for the one that he's in.
totally. Yeah, exactly. That's a great example too. You know, you've or the Healy Rays, indeed, like same thing. So with that said, when you then open the constituency up to being the entire state, it becomes way more uncertain, because it's much harder to gauge how does the whole of society feel. Middle class people, working class people, unemployed people, people with kids, people with no kids, old people, young people. You're getting the full spectrum of Ireland all making a decision on a single individual. And so it's kind of impossible to say how you're going to come out of something like that, and where, you know, in a way that obviously no election is certain, but you can tell with reasonable certainty, yeah, it makes sense for this person to run there. You know, I think that might be why people are a little bit hesitant, is it's very unpredictable.
Well, I think that it's also the presidential election is coming along at a really interesting time, even more so than the last one did. In terms of, it's just that it's like, you know, when you're dealing with general elections, you're dealing with, you know, local sort of things like constituency level, as you say. Whereas this is depending on how interesting the views are of the people who put themselves forward for it. Ultimately, I mean, it may well be the case it'll sort of just be a sort of a slate as blank as my background here in terms of the diversity of candidates. And I mean diversity in terms of like viewpoint diversity, obviously. But I think that it's a really interesting opportunity, to sort of gauge where the country is at. Like, yeah, do you? I know, say a lot of people were saying that sort of the conversation has moved on since Peter Casey last ran. But it'll be interesting to see if, you know, he took a sort of hard line this time around, or if someone else did, whether that would be nationally popular. It'll be one of the best indicators I think we have, because as we're going to discuss now shortly after this, the sort of polling picture, the present polling picture in 2025 doesn't reveal very much, and what it does reveal isn't very optimistic in I would say our estimation. But suffice to say, the presidential election might reveal something interesting in a way that general elections don't.
Yeah, I think that the key to winning this upcoming election is if somebody like Aontú, or someone like them, manages to get a candidate on the ballot to just run on a sensible conservative platform and don't be an insane idiot who's going to embarrass the country. That's basically all you have to do. You don't have to do anything fancy, or you know, jump up and down with really interesting, well thought out ideas. If all you have to do is just say, yeah, I believe there's two genders, I think that immigration has gone too far, blah 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 blah, like banal, boring center right talking points. And if you can just represent those well, then the rest of the vote is going to be divided among all the other candidates who are just pushing Michael D. Higgins type continuity Michael D. And that's going to be fractured 100 different ways, and you can scoop up the at least 1/3 of the country who are essentially conservative in their thinking.
Well, but this is also where it's very interesting, because, like, in the general election, candidates and parties are obviously obliged to be mainly concerned with bread and butter issues. I feel like that's sort of been the pattern, obviously, despite the ideological issues being important. I think far more often it's this thing like track record on housing, law and order, even though obviously the people who keep getting in don't have great records on these things, but even they're better than the alternative, some might argue. But the thing with the presidency is that, particularly with Michael D, was so opinionated in the office, and people think he's really sort of pushed the boundaries, I suppose, of the office in terms of a lot of his utterances while he's been in the office. So there's a sense in which it'll be a much purer ideological test than a general election, if you want to put it that way. It just really depends on whether or not the who ultimately puts themselves forward. Like if you sort of end up with this blank slate of, you know, Fine Gael people nearing the end of their career, Fianna Fáil people nearing the end of their career, what's new there? There's nothing new there. Like, I suppose it's you'd like to see more people say sort of in the mold of Nick Delahanty or even just sort of sensible conservatives putting themselves forward, because it'd be interesting to see the public's appetite for that.
You know, my prediction, if I had to make it now, is that, and look, a lot can happen between now and November. I'm speaking now in June, so it remains to be seen what sorts of there could be some cultural earthquake that takes place next month, something mental happens and the whole Overton window goes flying in one direction or another. I don't know. But to me, at this moment, I feel like we're going to get somebody, Michael D. Higgins, like a Francis Black or something like that. Because as we're saying here, you're talking about the zeitgeist and the attitude of the entire country. I'm not convinced that the entire country is sufficiently dissatisfied with the status quo to have some sort of revolutionary change where they vote in a bomb-throwing candidate, which is what would be the case regardless of if anybody remotely right of center got in. That would be a massive upset and a message to the establishment. I don't know that there's enough people today who feel like they want to send that kind of protest message. So I think there's lots of them, and I think there's a lot more of them than there were a year or two ago, but I don't think it's enough. So my instinct is we're probably going to see more of the same in maybe Mary Alice Higgins, Michael D. Higgins' daughter, or somebody like that. Nothing too extraordinary.
Well, I mean, lest people be disappointed that we haven't gone through the list in the itemized way we said we would, if I list a few of them there, people will understand fairly quickly why. It's like Joe Duffy, broadcaster, Luke Ming Flanagan, MEP, obviously, Fintan O'Toole, Tommy Tiernan. So with those read out, I think we can safely discard probably much of that list, unless you feel like there were any others on it who really ought to be discussed.
I did think that Catherine Connolly was interesting. She might be a Michael D. Higgins 2.0. She kind of has the gravitas, I think, to appeal to that side of the political spectrum. We also have your man Aubrey McCarthy, who was a recently elected senator who was involved in kind of charity work and things. I could see, I believe he's expressed some sort of tentative interest, and I could see him doing well. And also, oh, by the way, I hear he's a very committed Christian, for what it's worth. I've been told reliably, so that's
Vote
a data
secured.
point. Yeah. And then Holly Kearns of the Social Democrats, people have thrown her name out there. Like, there is a soft left vote. She'd get the Labour people. She'd get, obviously, the Soc Dems people, it goes without saying. She'd probably get a good
very, very
few
presentable candidate.
Yeah. PPPs and Sinn Féins. I mean, PPP maybe less so, because they'd want more radical than her even. But anyway, yeah, it is all. I'm sure it will get more interesting than it currently is. It's the waiting game to see who decides to actually go for the jugular.
Well, you mentioned something there a moment ago about how was it you phrased it? It was in relation to, I suppose, the sort of the wider political scene in Ireland. And with that in mind, one of the other things we wanted to discuss today was the Sunday Business Post poll that was published yesterday. Do you want me to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, sure.
Just some of the more interesting aspects of it. It essentially showed, as John wrote, I think, pretty accurately in a column earlier today that Irish politics is in a miserable state. I think he put it that way, which is and I think, again, this is a very accurate summation. Nobody is popular enough to command moral authority. Nobody is unpopular enough to feel their job is at risk. It's just an endless cycle of meh. So where have we got it here? Let me see.
Yeah, so I have it here that according to the Business Post Red Sea poll, 43% of homeowners would vote for either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael in the next election, compared to just 25% of those who don't own their own home. So as in, if you don't own a home, 25% of those people would vote for FFG, as it's colloquially known. And then, we see that renters are more likely to vote for Sinn Féin, etc. But long story short, when you go through the figures, there's a lot of continuity, pretty much happy with things as they are, etc.
Well, it's funny. It's like, yeah, so pretty much happy with things as they are in terms of that's what the outcome would be. But like when you dig down into it, it's like the popularity of all of these people has plummeted. It's like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael between them could only manage the support of 4 in 10. Yeah, as I say, 4 in 10 homeowners. It's like, that is nuts. I think, like, if you had told the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael management like 40, 50 years ago that that's where they would be, they'd be like, who was responsible for this collapse?
Yeah.
And the answer would obviously be the people who were in office currently. You got that sort of situation. I think, 6 in 10 people with their own homes were obviously the counter side to that is that 6 in 10 people who own homes are willing to risk opposition or left wing alternatives. It's like, what, there's not much can be said about who's popular in Ireland, because it doesn't seem like anyone is really. There's a lot that can be said about who's unpopular, and that's government. I think that's fair to say out of the back of that.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I mean, I had a rather depressing conversation just after the last general election, where I think I mentioned before I did my own amateur mini exit poll where I just hung around outside the polling station and I just interviewed about 40 people, if I recall correctly. So that's not a huge sample, but it is interesting. You do get a really nice range of perspectives and get to hear from the horse's mouth why people are voting the way they are, who they're voting for, and so on. This is in Dublin Bay South, which is kind of a bougie area that I was doing this in, so might not be representative of the whole country, but I'll never forget, I was getting all kinds of interesting answers. And one guy who's actually a fan of Gript, so if you're listening, my apologies, I don't mean to insult you, like, I'm just like, whatever, we're all entitled to our opinion and our own vote. But I asked him, I said, who did you vote for? And if I recall correctly, I think he said Fine Gael. And I was like, oh, cool. Why is that? This guy's a Gript follower, but like, he came over to me, he recognized me and was like, oh, cool, Ben, how's things? So I said, oh yeah, I'm like, why did you vote for Fine Gael? And he said, oh, look, they're useless. I know they're ruining the country, but sure, what's the alternative? Who am I going to vote for? Fianna Fáil? Like, they're just as bad. And I didn't say it to him in the moment because my job was just to collect the data, not to get into an argument. But I was thinking, there's other people than Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, right? Like, it's not like if you've lost, because he was always a Fine Gael voter and he'd voted for them for years and so on. And I was thinking, like people are in this weird, their mind will not allow them to consider an alternative option, and as much as I want to blame him for that, and I want to get annoyed with people who think like that and say, you're, not considering good options and you're ruining the country and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's easy to do that and to judge people. But the fact of the matter is, that just shows that these alternatives, the different parties, the different independent candidates, have not made a good enough case for themselves. The case has been made comprehensively that the government is inadequate, that they're failing in many key ways, that their, society is on the wrong path. Most people you talk to, taxi drivers, bus drivers, etc., will agree with those points. But the positive case, and that's why you should vote for me, has not been made adequately, and many people do not see the argument for that at all. So really, it is a failure of the political opposition. And as easy as it is to just say, "Oh, people are voting stupidly," they're not really. I mean, it is a messaging problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think the analysis is correct, and I share it, that far more people in Ireland are doing reasonably well than we're often inclined to think financially. It's like, their kids are, as John outlined, as I said earlier, their kids are able to go to a reasonable school. The value of their house is going up. Their jobs are stable and fine. And I think that's largely the case amongst the people who are inclined to vote. So it's like, if that's the case, you're not going to welcome in some sort of political earthquake, which is obviously what a lot of the sort of the opposition figures would represent in Ireland. And I think amongst the people who, this is going to get slightly anecdotal, but I think amongst the people who would most benefit from a shake-up of things, for whatever reason, there's just not very much exposure to new ideas there. Like, I think of a lot of friends that I went to school with, say, and they would attribute sort of a lot of the difficulties they face being people our own age who can't afford houses and who sort of see deterioration in their own living standards, to just sort of generally or vaguely, bastard politicians or something like this. And so that's why when the opportunity to vote them out comes up, they wouldn't necessarily vote for any sort of coherent opposition or anything like this. It's kind of like, I suppose, any of the names they don't recognize might get a vote or something like this. And I think that this really stems from this nearly a lack of education problem. It's like the vast majority, we've spoken about this before, the vast majority of people do not read about these things. They see an RT headline, they hear a snippet of RT news, they're sort of passively molded by the environment they find themselves in. And so there's sort of no voting strategy amongst, I would say, a large number of people who are dissatisfied with the status quo in Ireland. And I think that as long as that's the case, you're always going to be beaten out by the sort of, waddling along a relatively okay majority, or you're sort of casting the same vote every couple of years the election comes around.
Yeah, I personally am of the view that the voting system we have works in the sense that you can vote for people who ordinarily would never ever get a look in, and you can preserve your vote without feeling like you're wasting your vote, which is why America and all these different jurisdictions are locked into a total political insider two-party system, and nobody, even if you agreed more with a libertarian party or a green party candidate, you're never going to vote for them because it's a total waste of everyone's time. Whereas Ireland, obviously, you can justify voting for goofy, weird candidates who you think, yeah, he probably won't do well, but in an ideal world, I'd like to see him get somewhere, so I'll chuck a vote that way. Speaking of, sorry, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I was going to say, speaking of candidates who benefited from our electoral system, I was going to get on to Roderic and the fact that he hung in there and his most recent adventure. But maybe you have something to say about that.
No, let's skip to that. I was going, well, no, maybe let's hang on a sec, because we have plenty of time for Roderic. But I was just going to make the point that, like, 'cause I agree. I think just on the, I agree with what you're saying, sort of the Irish electoral system affords, but I just very often find myself wondering these days whether the ability to vote for sort of the very particular niche candidate that you're, the possibility that they might get elected, this niche candidate that you're interested in, it's clearly just not adding up to anything nationally effective. Whereas, like, yeah, take the UK for instance. Even I agree, like the UK, the US have been for a long time dominated by sort of, yeah, two party politics, but you do have now a very credible alternative coming up in reform within that system. And that's representative, I suppose, of the groundswell of dissatisfaction that's taken place over in the UK. Whereas I would say that our political or our electoral system has a lot to answer for, splitting the vote and ensuring, again, it sort of rewards little chieftain politics where it's not really in a lot of people's interests to sort of unite behind one particular leader, behind one particular party. And so I do sometimes wonder whether, again, to use that phrase, for ideological purity in terms of, who you're able to, vote for and potentially see elected in one constituency is coming at the expense of like a genuinely effective national politics.
Well, speaking of effective politics, we might move on to the most recent adventure of Roderic O'Gorman, the former Minister for Equality, Green Party leader. And actually, I'll start by saying something nice about Roderic, which is I saw the coolest thing ever last week or the week before. I was outside Leinster House and he was in the middle of recording a video for his social media. I only came in at the 11th hour as he was finishing, but contextually, it seemed like he was doing some sort of video about Ireland's public transport. And he was in the middle, he's there talking to the camera, and he's talking about the public transport system and climate change and all that. And as he finished talking, the bus pulled up perfectly and he stepped on seamlessly. And I don't know if he did it in one take or what, but I was telling him, like, fair play, like that was the timing could not have been more perfect. So I don't know if that's on his social media now. It might be. You can go.
I can already anticipate the comments like, yeah, and then he got the bus off to ruin the country.
Well, I thought from a cinematography perspective, he nailed it. So he has my support for that. But I don't know if he got the bus to the airport subsequently, because as we all know, we're in the middle of Pride Month. This is a very important time on the progressive liturgical calendar as far as the national celebration and defense of LGBT values. And you see, one of the problems is, like all kind of spiritual movements, you need to have martyrs, you need to have martyrdom, and a big thing that they like to emphasize, the left and progressives, is the sort of struggle from below. We are persecuted, the state is against us, but we're fighting on anyway, and yada yada. This is like a big part of where they get their cachet. And the issue is, in Ireland and in almost the entire Western world, they could not be less persecuted. In fact, they are very much in the ascendancy, and God help you if you challenge them, even in the most mild way possible. They are dominant across academia, politics, the every corporate office in the land. They have complete control of the media and all of these different institutions. So it's very hard to portray yourself as a persecuted minority and as a rebel movement when that's the case.
I was just to add, I can't imagine anything less rebellious than the country's tax body flying the flag over its insignia on the website. Like, I don't know if people saw that during the week. Revenue had a pride flag flying above the little revenue insignia on their website. It's like, I don't think they've ever done that for the tricolour. But suffice to say, yeah, doesn't cut a particularly rebellious image.
No, I mean, like, the same-sex marriage referendum wasn't that long ago. It was, what, 2015, I believe.
10 years ago, yeah. Well, I guess they're commemorating the decade of progress now.
So within the last decade, we had a vote on this, and obviously it passed. But 1/3 of the Irish population voted no to that referendum. So that is a minority, but it's not like a totally insane fringe of lunatics who can be totally discounted. And if you today were to say, you know what, I'm not too keen on same-sex marriage, I think that marriage is between a man and a woman, or, you know, you make an argument about adopting children, or whatever kind of argument you want to make, if you were to just calmly and reasonably articulate the view that 1/3 of the population holds, you would be incinerated by everyone around you. You might as well put on a clan hood and start throwing up Roman salutes. Like that level of vitriol would descend upon you. So that's the level of persecution you're talking about. Really, if there's any persecution going on, it's the other way. But sorry, you were gonna say?
No, not at all. I was getting my referendums mixed up between the 20 in terms of the results between the 2015 and the 2018 one. All the, close enough as the results were anyway. But yeah, what we wanted to discuss today was the fact that, as you say, they like to paint themselves in this very repressed, oppressed, whichever way you like to phrase it, way, and that, because that so obviously isn't the case, results in some real oddities. It results in some real absurdity, you might say, because we started with Roderic O'Gorman, and Mr. O'Gorman over the weekend was in Hungary, where pride marches have been banned, as is their right, you might say. And he was over there with a couple of other Irish politicians. I think he was over there with Cynthia Nimerku,
I believe Kieran Cuff.
Kieran Cuff. Exactly. There was a few, Maria Walsh, the MEP. There was a number of them over there pictured having a great old time. And as I say, the attempt to portray this movement as oppressed or anything like this, because they've been on a real sort of social media campaign with all of this. I've never seen Roderick put up so many videos as he does about this march in another country. But anyway, I thought it might be worthwhile reading the details from this article, because obviously I wasn't over there. I didn't look particularly closely. This was in the Irish Examiner. Do you object to my reading some of the details from this, Ben?
No, feel free. Before we weigh in with our hot takes, it's best to establish the facts.
Establish the facts. So anyway, yeah, they traveled over, and so the first thing I want to point out is that it's just sort of uncritically being reported that there were over 100,000 people at Budapest Pride. That is an enormous crowd. First to say, they will sort of begrudgingly say that there are like 5,000 people saying anti-immigration protest in Dublin City. Multiply that all the way up to 100,000, like that. I find it extraordinarily hard to believe, first of all, that there was 100,000 people in Budapest for Budapest Pride. And obviously, you're not going to have any government figures on that, because it was a banned march. But anyway, um, it's funny to me, the protest passed off without any major incident. There were no reports of assault emerging from the march, and there were only small groups of counter-protesters who made little impact, I understand.
Wait a minute. So you mean Orban didn't start deploying sarin gas and dropping napalm on the crowd and
Well, you might be surprised.
he was personally hanging out of a helicopter shooting at them with a high powered rifle. Like,
Yeah, well, exactly. He was standing in the upper floors of buildings that they were passing by, sort of offering conversion therapy and things like this. So, suffice to say, it doesn't appear to be the sort of oppressive atmosphere that they were expecting to be airdropped into, because it passed without a hitch. It was led by the parade was led by the mayor of Budapest, whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, who told the crowd, "We don't exactly look as though we were banned." It's like everything about this goes against the narrative that these Irish politicians have been promoting in their videos and their social media feeds over the weekend, where they were talking about how repressive Hungary has gone, how authoritarian it's gone. And yet, despite pride marches being banned, it went by peacefully. The police didn't, batter people in the streets in the same way that the Gardaí did during COVID, over here, or anything like that, or as they have in multiple places around the country in relation to immigration. But it still didn't stop them sort of attempting to portray it in the most oppressive possible light, because Maria Walsh, if I remember correctly, Maria Walsh, our esteemed MEP, was speaking about how political parties and organisers in Dublin would not have had to attend a number of security briefings ahead of their participation in the capital's Pride events. Obviously, they're speaking about the Budapest Pride here. She said, in the briefings, they were warned that there could be sound bombs, projectiles thrown at them. They were advised to take off earrings or any other loose items. They also tried to paint it. Drag artists, floats, and even music were largely lacking at the march in Hungary, she explained. There was not the same level of pride flags and bunting in windows around the city as you would see in Dublin throughout Pride Month. Um, it's absolutely farcical to attempt to paint this as some sort of authoritarian, dictatorial regime that Viktor Orban is imposing on the people. Hungary is, by all accounts, an absolutely beautiful country where people are by and large happy with if they're not necessarily happy directly with particular politicians or particular policies and things like this, they certainly seem to be happy with the standard of life that they're enjoying in Hungary. And to attempt to portray it in any other way is just completely disingenuous. And that's exactly what you have here. I mean, it went by without a hitch, and it hasn't stopped them talking about how dangerous this was, how essentially brave it was of all of these people to take part in the march that was completely unopposed going through the city. So it's just circus politics at its very best. I mean, they got a nice little sunny trip to Budapest out of it, where they undoubtedly, I mean, Roderic O'Gorman put up a video where he was talking to a taxi, where he said he was talking to a taxi driver who said he'd never taken part in a Pride march and he didn't even have anything to do with it, but he just was completely opposed to the authoritarian nature of the Orban regime. And it's like, these people are talking like they've been dropped into North Korea. It's a joke.
And you know what else? I'm against banning protest. Obviously, I don't think that you should be banning demonstrations and marches just because you don't personally disagree. But I also don't care, even if that is what Orban did. I struggle to bring myself to give a rat's about this, because people like Roderic O'Gorman vociferously continue to defend hate speech laws and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And the entire argument that they make for hate speech laws is you should not be allowed to spread harmful ideas that damage society, that pose a threat to people, blah, blah, blah. And I'm the arbiter of what that means. And people like me, we get to decide what constitutes hate and what doesn't, and what's harmful and what isn't. And we're going to ban you by hook or by crook. He's made this clear repeatedly. And if you ask him right now today, he'll tell you that that's his position. So given that that's how they feel, when another country says, we agree with you, Roderic, we think that harmful ideas should not be allowed to be propagated and perpetuated, and one of those harmful ideas is the idea that a child can be transgender and switch their sex using hormone treatments and surgeries and other irreversible damaging things. I think that's a harmful idea that damages society, and on that basis we are banning any march that advocates for such things. It's a bit rich for somebody like Roderic to start freaking out and acting like this is some kind of heinous injustice. Are we libertarians who think that anybody can do whatever they want and we're going to have this big libertine, let's all express ourselves and have our free marches? Or do we think that it's good to police morality and enforce a certain standard of conduct on society? Because if you choose one, you cannot choose the other. And I think the blatant hypocrisy from the people involved in the march, all of whom we know support hate speech laws and harmful disinformation laws and all these other kinds of things, you're not upset that marches and protests and events are being banned. You're upset that you're not the one who's banning them. You're upset that it's being done to you because you're so used to the shoe being on the other foot that now it feels uncomfortable being subjected to your own bullshit, effectively.
Well, an example of this just complete divergence in worldviews was, I didn't see it on his X page, but I think it was a TikTok that he put up. He was obviously doing a sort of, Hungary takedown edition over the weekend, because he was speaking sort of, not just even directly about pride, but he was speaking about authoritarian moves that the Orban government has made, and he was speaking about this in relation to NGOs. And he was speaking about how they've really cracked down on NGOs. And it's really funny because he was citing all of these things as examples of how horrendous the Hungarian government are. Everything he was saying, I was like, that sounds really good to me. It's like cutting off government funding to NGOs, limiting the influence they can have on government. I was like, these are things that a not insignificant section of the Irish population are dying for. And he's talking about it as though it's, the boot on the neck of an entire country. There was one point, what was it he said? Yeah, it was something ridiculous. Like he was like, he's like, guys, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, guys, the clue is in the name, non-governmental organization, and he was citing that as an example of the fact that non-government NGOs are effective opposition to government. And I was like, this is just
That's
complete
that's why
gaslighting.
that's why his colleague Joe O'Brien lost his seat in government and then went to be the head of the Irish Council for
Righty.
Civil Liberties, because they have such an antagonistic, pugilistic relationship that you can seamlessly transition from one right into the other and then back again. Of course.
I mean, this stuff drives me so crazy. I notice I'm finding it difficult to like sort of sit still in my seat, even as I'm talking about it here. But it's just so nonsensical. And yeah, to use it's proper grade A industrial gaslighting. This idea that he's like, it's in the name, guys, non-governmental organizations, and it's like, meanwhile, our government is pumping funding into these organizations who have an unparalleled degree of access to the government, whose voices are heard way above and beyond your average Joes in Ireland. It's just a farce. And it's also, there's another aspect of this as well, which is that this is one of the major, some might say one of many downsides of globalization, which is that it's increasingly a trend in Western countries to engage in the politics of elsewhere. It's like, why the hell are Roderic O'Gorman? Maybe you can make an argument Maria Walsh being there because she's an MEP, although I would still think it was ill advised. But like Roderic O'Gorman, who was a TD in Ireland, why is he over in Hungary putting out videos about Hungarian politics and attempting to sort of shift the status quo over there? It's like there's more than enough work to be doing over here, Roderick. Although, not that I'm complaining about the fact that he's not over here doing work, but I should add. But I feel like this is just a trend that you see taking off across the Western world. Another way in which you see this obviously is the Middle Eastern conflict, where you have, like, again, cite the UK as an example, but it's not too far off in Ireland as well. People whose sort of main talking point is, being generally speaking in relation to this conflict, pro-Palestine. It's like, by all means, care about this issue, but let's not pretend it's the central issue in Ireland's national politics, or it shouldn't. I certainly would be an advocate for the fact that it shouldn't be. And it's also the case in the UK, although it's a little more explainable in that instance because you have, far more advanced immigration situation over there. And so you have many people who sort of feel more loyalty to, say, the Middle East than they do to the UK.
Yeah. No, I think I mean, we're journalists, so I don't attend protests anyway in a attendee capacity. Like, I might cover one, but I'm not going to go to a march regardless. But if I was going to go to a march, the only kind of the only circumstance under which I could envisage myself going to a protest overseas is maybe if something was happening in Brussels and it was an objection to some European wide regulation that was going to come in that would have implications for Ireland. You could justify that. But other than that, the French government is doing something that I think is stupid. Like, that's France. France is good for people. I think they can sort their own stuff out, as can Spain, as can Taiwan. Like, I think they're grand. You know what I mean? Like, they don't need me to hop on my electric powered bus and head to the airport so I can go weigh in with my hot take.
No, I think this is where the origin of that heat map meme comes from as well, which is the people on the left. It shows generally care about people and things that are further removed from them, whereas people on the right or conservatives generally care about things that are closer to them. So, like, family, immediate community, nation, and things like that. Whereas I read that study some while ago, but I think it was so ridiculous in, like, sort of the on the left side of things that, they cared about things that were further from them, and it extended even to, like, inanimate objects like rocks, trees, nature, and things like, which is obviously where you would say that sort of left attachment to the climate issue comes from. But I think that's very much at play here, which is that, like, I'm certainly not saying that, a conflict in another part of the world isn't an important issue. It surely is, and it surely needs to be sorted out. But it's also the case that we live in a reality that has limits. It's like, we in Ireland can't possibly care as much And I think nor should we even, because we have to sort of till the soil that's been given to us to look after. It's like we really should be focused on making Ireland as good as it possibly can be. And there's a lot of evidence that, that isn't being done, and we should sort of, refocus on that a little.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to. I really hope this doesn't sound callous, because it's not that I don't care about what I'm about to say. It's actually that I care too much. In a way, it's the opposite. That I've gotten to the point where I don't want to hear news about tragedies that happen on the other side of the world. And again, it's not because I'm not interested and they can all go to hell. I don't care if there was a mudslide in Indonesia that killed 3,000 people. I'm not bothered. It's not that. It's that I can't help those people, and I know at any given moment, there's an unlimited amount of horrific things happening. There's children being molested, and there's people getting their heads cut off by cartels, and there's people being sold into slavery and bombed, and pregnant women being stabbed with bayonets. Manky, horrible, horrible stuff. And I can't do anything about the vast, vast majority about it. I'm totally powerless to intervene in those cases. So simply knowing about it does nothing but upset me and damage my mental health for no one's benefit. So my stopping off point really for interest in news is stuff that affects me and that I can affect. And if it's not one of those two things, I kind of don't want to know about it. Not because I don't care, but because it's actually not good for you to constantly be worrying about a tsunami that destroyed an orphanage in South China. Like that, it's not helpful to you or to them to know about that.
Nope, I think that's perspective that's very much required these days. And as you emphasize, it's not about not caring about these things, but it's like there's a sense in which this is just like easy virtue. It's like it's very easy to say you care about all of these things. It's like, what the hell? Like, what does that result in? It doesn't result in anything good for these people. It doesn't, and it allows you to feel like a great person in the meantime, having done nothing. But no, I just to say that, yeah, I think that's perspective that is rarely voiced, but is certainly valuable in the sort of age of performance politics that we live in. But I think that was our menu for today, and we've exhausted it.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there is no dessert. So we will have to kick out everybody from and close up now. But with that said, thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of the Long Game Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next week. I was going to say next Monday, but knowing us, you never know. It could be Saturday. So we will aim for Monday, and we will hope to see you then. God bless.
God bless.